en hij loopt.
Hi everyone, my name is Frank Evers and I'm from the Netherlands, the home of Heineken. And my job is to train bar staff all over the world and I teach them how to treat beer the best possible way. Over the years I've been to 80 countries, 500 cities, training over 100,000 people. And you know what? It beats working for a living. I can assure you that. Now, when I was younger, I owned a few bars in the Netherlands and we had this number one hit. I will show you. It is called Living Next Door to Alice. Alice, who the is Alice. Unfortunately, I was the only one who didn't get rich, but it got me in front of Freddie Heineken. And this was a fantastic meeting because he showed me that about selling beer, it is about selling a lot of beer, but make sure that every single beer you sell is of perfect quality. Because Freddie took every complaint about Heineken as a personal insult. Now, I had to admit that I had no clue what I was selling actually. So I started to educate myself and I started to educate my staff, and immediately my consumers started to react on it. So I kept doing it. Now, we created a big global program and it's called Star Serve. So everywhere in the world, people are trained to treat beer the best possible way according to a certain ritual. And I will take a deep dive into the ritual today with you guys. Now, when you go to a bar and you order a beer and you are prepared to pay a lot of money for it, what can be an irritation around beer? Now, I see you, I hear you scream when beer is not cold. Guys, cold beer sells more beer. When beer is cold, the CO2 sticks to the beer and it is easy to drink and easy to digest. So cold beer sells more beer. Dirty glassware. When a glass is not clean, the foam will fall apart and it will collapse pretty fast. So you can have the best beer in the world, you can think you are a great barkeeper, but when you start with a dirty glass, you simply have no chance. Foam. If you take a close look at any commercial picture of a beer, you will always see a certain amount of beer in the glass and a certain amount of foam. With Heineken, we want beer to the shoulders of the star and on top a nice and shiny head. Now who can resist a nice and shiny head, right? So the foam, too much or too little, can irritate us. Now the last one can be presentation, the way it is served. Now when we do these kind of trainings, I always ask people to use a beer mat and I always encourage people to use branded glassware because we want to identify ourselves with the brand. So it's the coaster, brand facing out, the glass facing out, and look them in the eye and say, enjoy a Heineken. So those 4 irritations are for consumers, and my goal for today is that after the training everyone is able to pour the perfect beer. Now, in pouring the perfect beer there is a ritual. We call it the Star Serve ritual. It's 5 simple steps, and the first step is to chill and clean the glass. When the glass is clean, the foam will stick on top of the beer and the CO2 stays in the beer. Now then the pour, it's under an angle of 45 degrees to keep the CO2 in the glass, because we need the CO2 for refreshment and digestion. Then step 3 is the skim. We want to remove the top of the foam, because in the top of the foam there's a lot of oxygen, there's a lot of bitterness, and we want to create surface tension. Step 4 is to check how it looks, and step 5 is the serve. Now how does it look in real life? 1 glass, give it a quick visual check, cool it and clean it, 45 it, open the tap in a swift motion, let the beer run in spirally. When it starts to overflow, strain the glass, and when the glass is full, you stop pouring, and then step 3 is to skim, and step 4 is to check how it looks, and step 5 is to serve, and it should be to the horizontal shoulders of the star. And then you say, enjoy a Heineken. Now, that ritual, you don't need a lot of IQ. I mean, if your IQ is above room temperature, you should be able to do that. But what is the reason that not everybody does it like this, if this is the best way to treat this kind of beer? Now, to understand that, we need to dive a little bit more deep into the beer, because what are we working with? What are we selling? What are we drinking? What are we brewing? Now, beer is basically, for us barkeepers, nothing but a clear carbonated beverage. And when it comes out of the tap and we illuminate the tap, you can look right through it. But when it hits the glass, it's going to change into foam, and for foam, a lot of barkeepers are afraid to work with. Look what I mean. So I open the tap, I see a clear beverage, and when it hits the glass, it's going to change into foam. But what you also see is that a lot of foam is changing back into beer again. So you have to make the conclusion that the foam contains a lot of beer, and when I leave it like this, you will see that within a minute or so, a full glass of foam gradually changes into a normal amount of beer. Now, this is not the new way of pouring, okay? But this is just to show you that you don't have to be afraid to work with the foam, as long as you know what you're doing, as long as you know how it's reacting, and as long as you know why there is foam on the beer in the first place. Because what is the reason for foam on the beer? You think it's a good question, next question please. But the foam is to protect the beer. The foam is like the cap on the bottle to keep it fresh. You want to keep the CO2 in the beer, and you want to keep the oxygen out of the beer. Because beer has a few enemies. The biggest enemy of beer is the barkeeper. We do a lot of things that make the foam collapse pretty fast. And that is when the nozzle, for instance, touches the foam is going to fall apart and the beer is going to oxidate. So when the oxygen hits the foam, it's going to basically dry out and it's going to collapse, and that's what we want to prevent. Because if oxygen gets in contact with the beer, the CO2 goes out, the beer goes flat or dead, and the color will become a little darker. The process here is called oxidation. And oxidation gives the beer a bad taste, and that is why we need to protect it. Now, like I said, beer has a few enemies. The nozzle, for instance, is a big enemy. Then we have light. That is why beer normally comes in a green or a brown bottle to block out the UV. So, for quality's sake, when you have a Heineken in a glass, you should finish this within 8 to 10 minutes. Always responsibly, but after 8 to 10 minutes, this product is completely changed. And time is also a big element, right? So, oxygen, time, and UV light. Now, if we take a closer look at the head of foam, we see it consists out of two layers. Like here we call the lower CO2 line, and here we have the upper CO2 line. Let me show you what I mean. When I put a glass I stop pouring when the glass is full with foam. Always the same ritual. When the glass is full, I stop, and then I skim the moment it's overflowing. And now you think this is rising, but what actually happens is that in the foam there's a lot of beer. The beer will fall back into the glass, and the CO2 presses the oxygen to the top, and then you're there with the skimmer to remove it. And if you take a close look, you probably never did, but under the head of foam you can see a thin line of small CO2 bubbles. So this is happening all the time, no big deal. But where we become important as a barkeeper, that is the next thing. When the glass is full, I stop. It's like a law. And then I skim the moment it's overflowing with a wet skimmer under an angle of 45 degrees. I remove the oxygen, I remove the most bitter part of the hops, and at the same time I leave a thin layer of water behind that is creating the surface tension. Then I have a beer that is very well protected against the loss of CO2 and also against the air pressure. Now when you have to explain in a busy bar what the reason is for the head of foam, you always tell your consumers, this is what you pay for, the rest is for protection, don't drink without protection. So we have this great ritual, we have this great beer, but are we going to sell more beer because of the ritual? Now to answer that question, please do not say the first thing that pops in your mind, but why do we drink beer in the first place? Thirst quenching, right? This product is over 12,000 years old to quench your thirst. And our consumers still treat it as an original thirst quencher. So if you are thirsty and you want to quench your thirst, what are you looking for? The drink needs to be cold, fresh, easy to drink, easy to digest. And what about taste? Not too sweet. Because if you drink 2 Cokes in a row, you're full. Because sweetness will give you like a fed up feeling. It will calm you down. But if you have 2 beers, what do you want? More beer, right? So the only reason to order a second beer is the quality of the first one. Because if the first one is good, like cold and fresh, well served, then the second one might be as good as well. But if the first one is not good, why would you order a second one in that place? Now the good news is, treating beer is not very difficult. The only thing, you have to be motivated to do it exactly the right time, every time, all over again. So, we now know why we have this ritual, we now know what beer is, and we also understand why it is good for business. Taste or aftertaste? What are we looking for? Now, we can talk about it for like an hour, but nothing beats experience. If you pour a beer and you want to drink it, it is always very important that people can see that the beer is clear, because something you're going to swallow could kill you, so you want to make sure that it's safe. Now a beer drinker is a completely different person than a wine drinker. A wine drinker, they don't trust it, right? Because the wine comes in the glass and they have to look if the color is good. And if the color is good, they still don't trust it. They're going to smell it, another sense. And if the smell is good, they still don't trust it. They are going to take a sip, they're going to add some oxygen, and then they spit it out. Beer drinkers have a different approach. The beer drinker sees the beer and he will tilt the glass and he will drink under the foam, because the foam is just there to protect the beer. So the beer drinker is going to take a sip, swallows immediately. If you don't like it, you're too late. So only when the beer reaches mouth temperature again, body temperature, that is the moment you start to taste something. What is happening right now, my mouth is getting dry, we call it dry aftertaste. My tongue is warming up and it becomes a bit bitter. So my mouth is dry, warm, bitter. What do I want to do? Exactly, I want to take another sip. So the cold temperature is going to isolate my taste buds, and the CO2 is going to activate the inside of my mouth again, and so it will happen all over again. And that is exactly the reason why we can postpone drinking beer for like the whole day. Some people can do this for 10 hours in a row. You can think of beer but you don't drink it, but the moment you have one, what do you want? Another one. So basically, you can't help yourself. It is stronger than you. Now the fun part is that it is happening with like regular Heineken, but also with the 0.0 Heineken, because it has the same bitterness. The only thing it doesn't have is the alcohol. So the aftertaste, that is what we are looking for. Now, if there is one thing we need to investigate basically, is the difference between a skinned beer and an unskinned beer. So, is there a difference in taste between a beer that you pour and skim and a beer that you pour and don't skim, right? No overflow. Now, I do this all the time with a lot of people, so I give them the two beers and I let them experience. And 9 out of 10 times people will say that the non-skinned beer is a little bit more bitter, a little bit harsh, a little bit metallic, and doesn't have a clean finish. So no dry aftertaste. The skin beer, most of the time people will say it's a little fresher, it is smooth, and it gives them a nice and dry aftertaste. Now the fun part is, you can do this yourself. You can pour like one beer, don't skim it, you can pour one beer, skim it, and taste it yourself, and you will find the difference. So what is going on in the top of the foam? That is where the science meets the ritual. So what is happening in the top of the foam? When the CO2 extracts the beer, the reaction is foam. And in the foam there's a big concentration of the hops. And hops is, among other things, responsible for the bitterness. So the lightest part is the most bitter part. The lightest part is on top first, you remove it. So you have a fresh and clean beer. If you leave it in, you will taste it, it's not so fresh. Again, try it yourself. So, Now the circle is round. There is a ritual that makes a difference. I really want to thank you for your time, your energy and your concentration, and I wish you a great afternoon, and the only thing I can say is cheers.